Mark Anthony Rogalski was born on August 10, 1966, in Brooklyn, New York. When he was just 3 years old, his parents divorced and he moved to San Diego, California, with his mother and older brother. In the new city, Mark began to enjoy sports, starting with skateboarding. As his father was not present, his older brother became a second father for him, who encouraged him in everything, especially sports. At the age of 10, Mark practiced skateboarding regularly. However, he hung out with some upper-middle-class boys, who are always buying new things, and as Mark didn't follow them because he was poor, he was always left out. In addition, these boys no longer wanted to skate. They were interested in surfing, and all the equipment needed to practice the sport was way more expensive than Mark couldn't afford them. Thus, Mark realized that he would never fit into this group and decided to find new friends. He met a group of kids at a skate park near his house and quickly clicked. More comfortable with this group, Mark got even better at skating by being picked up by professional teams and even won local skating contests. Gradually, bigger sponsors became interested, and in 1982, he won the Canadian Amateur Skate Championship in Vancouver, which was his first major title. In the 1980s, skateboarding enjoyed a huge surge in popularity in the United States, driven primarily by a few teenagers from County San Diego, California, who became sport superstars. Mark Gator was one of these teenagers. After that, Mark's career only took off. He sold thousands of products, appeared in numerous magazines, and was sponsored by several brands. According to some sports commentators, Mark was like a rock star, always traveling all over the world and living life as best as he could. During an interview, Mark Gator said the skateboarding was a way to vent his anger and negative feelings. He said that instead of hitting someone or breaking up things, he gave everything in the sport, and that made him a winner. Mark was responsible for creating a daring skateboarding move, in which the skater tries to get enough momentum and height to fly vertically off the ramp, with their body almost perpendicular to the ground, flip once, and then land in the same space they left, rolling back. The move is considered quite difficult, and was named Gator in honor of its creator. Mark was skateboarding's biggest star for years. He turned professional at just 14 years old and earned around $100,000 a year from the sport. The man was seen as a hero by skaters everywhere and bragged about being an ambassador, saying whenever he intended to convert people to the sport. He still had clothing lines and skateboards produced under his name. On a 1987 tour, 21-year-old Mike Gator met two young women, 21-year-old Jessica Bergsten and 17-year-old Brandy McLean. The two were best friends. Mark spent the entire weekend with Brandy, and after a few months, they decided to be in a relationship, with a girl moving in with him. According to reports from close people, Mark and Brandy became inseparable. They partied in bars almost every night and led quite an eventful life. In an interview, Brandy said that they got high every night, using various types of narcotics and running around the city. Furthermore, they often made skateboarding videos together, as well as appearing as models for sports magazines. Mark made a point of taking Brandy everywhere he traveled for his competitions. He even brought her to Brazil and took her to Europe to accompany him in the tournaments he played. According to the skater's brother, Matt Rogalski, Mark even bought 2 cars for the young woman. He said that the two were absolutely in love with each other, and anyone could see that. In the late 80s, a new practice of skateboarding began to become popular. It was street skating, where athletes challenged urban obstacles like curbs, stairs, and trash cans. With that, the ramp skateboarding techniques, which Mark was the master until then, started to become obsolete. Gradually, the sponsors began to abandon it and look for street skate professionals. According to a friend of Mark, Perry Gladstone, the man was very worried about the movement and began to feel outdated, which left him quite stressed. He started trying more risky stunts in order to keep impressing audiences. Then, in October 1989, after a competition in Germany, Mark went out playing like he used to, drinking and wandering from party to party. At a certain point in the night, he met with other skaters on the second floor of an apartment and decided to jump out the window with his skateboard, believing he could do a trick from there. Mark almost lost his life in the accident. He fell onto a barbed wire fence, which injured his neck, face, and thumb. The man was taken to a hospital in Germany and then transferred back to the United States, where he had to undergo several plastic surgeries to reconstruct his face. After leaving the hospital, friends said that Mark was completely different. He claimed to have found Jesus during the time he was hospitalized, and that he felt as if he had been born again. Motivated by another skater, Olgi Konstantino, who also had an accident years before and decided to dedicate his life to religion after that, being known as the miniature of skateboarding, Mark Gator started to follow a similar path. Olgi says he introduced Mark to God and convinced the man to join him on his journey. After their full recovery, Olgi and Mark went on to preach to skaters, surfers, and others in general. People were surprised by Mark's new profile. Brandy, his girlfriend, wasn't quite ready to go down the same path. She later said that after Mark hooked up with Olgi, the relationship was never the same, and he became someone completely different from the one she knew. Seeing the relationship go downhill, Brandy decided to leave Mark and move back in with her mother and stepfather. According to friends, Mark was devastated by the end, having been more bothered by the end of the relationship than by the accident he had suffered and which almost lost his life. After the end of the relationship with Brandy, Mark had reactions that many didn't expect. Upon learning that his ex was going out with some friends he knew from surfing, the man started making several calls to the girl's mother and cursed her constantly. According to Brandy, he seemed crazy and used a lot of profanity to address her and was always leaving weird messages on her answering machine. One night, Brandy came home to find that someone had broken into her room and taken all the gifts she got from Mark. Both the girl and the police suspected that it would have been Mark himself who did it, but they didn't get any evidence. In an attempt to make it up to Mark and keep him as a friend, Brandy invited him to her house for dinner. However, the two began to argue inside Mark's car, a discussion that was motivated by the man's jealousy. According to the girl, he began to drive along a deserted road, and his gaze and voice changed. He would have said that he should take her to the middle of nowhere and beat her up, and leave her there alone. He also said that he could get away with it easily, because people would know that she deserved it. At that moment, Brandy is said to have started crying and begging him to take her home, saying that her parents knew she was with him and that he would not get away with doing something. It was then that Mark relented and took her back to her house. After the episode, Brandy was very scared and fearing for her life. She decided to flee to New York without telling anyone where she was going and what had happened between her and Mark. A few weeks later, Jessica Bergsten, Brandy's best friend, whom Mark met the same day he met Brandy, came to San Diego for the holidays. Upon arriving in the city, Jessica called Mark, with whom she still had contact, and asked him to show her the main sights of the city. Jessica was 21, tall, and blonde, just like Brandy. She was an aspiring model, and according to Brandy, was brave and incredibly smart girl who loved to travel. Brandy said that when her friend wanted to have fun, nothing else mattered. She also said that the two used to go to Mexico together and visited various places there. On March 20, 1991, Jessica and Mark had lunch together at an Italian restaurant. Afterwards, they went to the men's apartment with some movies and bottles of wine. As the girl got ready to leave, Mark went to his car, came back silently, and hit her 3 times in the head and face using the metal lock on the car's steering wheel. Jessica fell to the floor instantly. The man then handcuffed her and carried her upstairs to his room. There, he pinned her to the bed and forced intercourse for 3 hours straight. Jessica was conscious the entire time and begged Mark to stop, screaming for help several times. In one of his attempts to shut her up, he took a surfboard bag from the closet and put it inside her mouth. She started screaming, saying she couldn't breathe, while Mark stopped her breathing even more using his hands. This ended up causing the young woman's death. Afterwards, Mark Gator turning his mattress over to hide the body fluid stains and placed Jessica's body, as well as her clothes, bursts, and used handcuffs in the trunk of his car. The men drove for about 2 hours, pulling into a secluded off-road spot called Shell Carlsbad, and buried Jessica in a shallow grave, 100 miles outside of town. While driving back home, Mark threw the girl's clothes and objects out of the car window. Afterwards, he rented a rug steamer and cleaned the bloodstains off his living room rug. After a few days without contact with Jessica, Stephen Bergsten, the girl's father, decided to notify the police and traveled to the city of San Diego to look for her. He put up several missing persons posters around town, with pictures of Jessica and her physical characteristics. Stephen also talked to the girl's friends and even found Mark Gator himself to ask about his daughter. Mark obviously said he didn't know where she was. Despite all the efforts of the police and Stephen, the case remained unsolved, even 2 months after the incident. On April 10th, Jessica's body was found by some campers passing by the place where she was buried. However, the body was so badly decomposed that it couldn't be identified, so it hasn't been linked to the girl's disappearance case. It was then that, on one of the recurring days of Mark and Augie Costantino going out to preach messages of Christianity to young people on the beach, they found a girl next to a telephone booth. At the time, Augie started to preach to the girl, but she said that she didn't want to hear about religion and that she had nothing to worry about. Augie then pointed to a poster that was tapped in the cam. It was the poster about Jessica's disappearance. The men reasoned with the girl that the young woman on the poster shouldn't have anything to worry about either, and was now missing, and perhaps lifeless. The girl ignored Augie's speech and walked out of the place with her friends. What caught his attention, however, was Mark's reaction as he gave that speech. According to him, the man turned pale and completely silent, something that was unusual, as Mark used to preach along what he preached to some young men. A day later, after the two of them had a Bible study, Mark showed up at Augie's house late at night, crying and claiming to be Judas Iscariot. According to Augie, the two sat and prayed for about an hour, until the men calmed down and returned home. A week after the episode, Mark saw Augie again and confessed to the crime against Jessica. Upon hearing his friend's testimony, Augie took him to the police station so he could turn himself into the police. The officers responsible for Mark's arrest said they were surprised to see someone turn himself for a crime they didn't even know had happened. According to investigations, there are no witnesses to the crime. No one heard the woman's cries for help, and the murder weapon was never found. After the confession, Mark took the detectives to where he had buried the body, so that they could collect evidence and talk to the local police, as the body had been found the previous year but hadn't yet been identified. To the detectives, Mark said that everything he hated about his ex-girlfriend Brandy, he also hated about Jessica, because according to him, they looked alike. Still, according to him, the victim was a model of Brandy, and he blamed her for their separation, even thought the young woman had nothing to do with it. As soon as the police announced Mark Gator's confession, the entire press across the country began to turn their attention to the case. The crime was on the cover of the main local newspapers, and television broadcast all the details about the case, with reenactments of the crime and the confession. Skate communities reacted to the crime with quite a shock. Several business partners and fellow skaters said it was hard to believe that someone as nice as Mark would have committed such a horrible crime. Throughout the media coverage of the case, several skaters complained that journalists were blaming the sport as a whole and not just Mark. That's because the press articles started to focus on the violent aspect of skateboarding, either because of the riskier maneuvers or because the way of life that skaters usually have, using this to supposedly show how Mark would have been someone unreliable since before. The case has divided people across the city, with some defending Mark Gator and others calling for severe punishment for him. Skateboarding, in turn, suffered a large drop in supporters, with several people failing to follow the sport by associating it with the crime. The police continued to collect evidence on the case in order to assemble a good body of evidence in case Mark recanted his confession. They found bloodstains under the carpet in his apartment and a receipt for the device used to clean it. After collecting evidence, police charged the man with the crime, asking for capital punishment or life imprisonment without the right to parole. Mark Gator chose not to hire an attorney, and with that, a public defender named John Jimenez was appointed by the state to defend him. The defender immediately disputed the validity of the confession, saying he had been dissuaded by his friend Augie. In addition, the defender appealed against the charge of forced relations, saying that the decomposing body couldn't show signs of the crime. Mark had confessed to this, but the lawyer was doing everything he could to get him to back out. Despite not denying the client's guilt, the defender suggested the crimes was the victim's fault. He said in an interview that the girl was a hottie and that he had a long list of people with whom she would have had unconventional relations, including the entire basketball team at the University of Arizona. These statements were very poorly received by both the press and general population. In January 1992, during a hearing, the court rejected the charge of forced relations. With that, Mark Gator pled guilty to the crime, thus avoiding capital or life since he had made a deal with the prosecution. During the hearing, he submitted a 4-page written statement saying he had been waging an internal war since before the crime. He said he had thought about going back to confession many times, but that now he was sure of what to do and had got the enlightenment not to hide anything anymore. About the crime, Mark said he felt sadness for the loss of Jessica. He wrote that 2 months before the crime, he felt some strange and almost uncontrollable things, having several perverse visions according to him. The man also said that he was also a victim for having turned his back on God. He said he was sorry for everything he had done and that he didn't want to run away from the blame of his actions. At the end of his statements, Mark Gator said that knowing that God forgave him 2,000 years ago on the cross, and although he tried to forgive himself daily, he couldn't and maybe never would. The trial was full of controversy, with several court officials being mobilized to search everyone who was close to the scene. Shortly before the trial, police received information that Jessica's father was going to the hearing with his wife to try to take the life of Mark Gator. The information, however, was not confirmed. During the trial, Mark asked Jessica's parents to forgive him. He said that God had changed him and that those were not empty excuses. Jessica's father, however, refused excuses and shouted several bad words at criminal. He regretted not being able to say goodbye to his daughter and asked the judge to ignore Mark's claims of repentance and religious conversion. On March 6, 1992, Mark Gator Rogowski was sentenced. He was convicted of all the crimes he was responsible for, getting a sentence of 25 years to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 18 years. According to reports from close people, Mark looked really sorry. In prison, he reported having gone through some problems during his childhood and that this could have been a motivator for him to commit that crime. However, he also said that the crime was motivated by revenge due to the end of his relationship with Brandy. About skateboarding, Mark said he knows that he will probably never ride one again, but that he hopes to get out of jail someday to learn how to fly a kite, something he has never done and that he's really wanted since he was a child. On June 14, 2022, the San Diego County Legal Counsel granted Mark Gator parole. The public ministry, for its part, said it would file a lawsuit to revert the decision, claiming that the victim and her family deserve continued justice in this case. The famous actress Patricia Arquette, winner of the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress in 2015 for her work in Boyhood, exposed on her Twitter that in the late 80s she went out with Mark, but the way he kissed her caused strangeness in her, and she had a very bad feeling. She also said that at the end of the meeting she gave a false phone number, and the two never turned around. And she only went to find out about him only after he confessed to the crime against Jessica, and the news reverberated. The actress ended the post by saying, "Moral of the story, trust your instincts." Mark Gator's life was chronicled in the documentary entitled Stoked, The Rise and Fall of Gator. The case was also interpreted in an episode of the series Shattered from Discovery Investigation. Currently, Mark Gator is in a prison in the state of California where he awaits a date for his release on parole. Alright folks, so that's it. Thanks for watching until the end. Best wishes, and I'll see you next time.